Date with a Debut is recorded and produced on Awabakal Country. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land.
History is like my imaginative place. I don't think of myself as an historical fiction writer. I think of myself as a literary fiction writer who just happens to write in different period of time. It's the first section I go to when I go into a bookshop. It's something I adore, and I'd like to say it's for educational reasons, but I just love entering the imaginative space in history.
Welcome to Date with a Debut, a podcast about debut authors, their incredible books, and their journeys to publication. If you are looking for a new author to discover or writing inspiration for your own story and you don't know where to start, this is the place to be. I'm Nick Wasiliev, host of the show, and I'm delighted to welcome another debut author in today's episode. You can find any books mentioned in today's podcast down in the description. We will discuss mild spoilers ahead, so I recommend you grab yourself a copy of the book now, or at least very soon. Wherever you are listening, thank you for listening with us and supporting the Australian book industry, and if you enjoy the show, hit us with a review, a rating, or a thumbs up wherever you get your podcasts. Lastly, this episode is brought to you by Podpixels, the ultimate storytelling tool for passionate podcasters. More on them later in the show. Hey everybody, it is Date with a Debut time. Nick Wasiliev here on Awabakal Country, and for today's episode we dive into a world of generations of war and trauma, the impact on families, on grief, on love, on loss. But today I chat with a tutor, a university lecturer, Lenny Robinson. Her work has been published in Overland, Westerly, Ireland, the best Australian essays. She's also an author of a short biography, This Moral Pandemonium. I love that name. But we're here today to talk about her debut historical fiction novel, And in the Morning, published by University of Queensland Press, which won the 2026 Quentin Bryce Award. You can get it down in the description box. You can get it at your local bookstore. You can check it out at your local library. You can get it online. Whatever suits you best. It is there. It's available. And it is a bloody damn good read. Joining me all the way from Naarm this morning, Lenny, welcome to Date with a Debut.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Nick. That was a beautiful introduction.
You're too kind. It is a pleasure to have you here. And we were just literally talking about it a second beforehand, off air, but I got the sense you were a devourer of history. You love history. History screams off the page in this book, and it's one of the most enjoyable and educational subjects, in my opinion, that you can get into. I love my history myself, and I can see that there is a clear teacher, that teacher and lecturer and university lecturer in your bio. It screams off the page. You're a teacher at heart. As at the risk of a general or a big, massive open question, where does history sit for you, in yourself, for Lenny? Where does history sit?
History is like my imaginative place. I can't imagine ever writing. I don't think of myself as an historical fiction writer. I think of myself as a literary fiction writer who just happens to write in different period of time. But history is such a point of fascination for me. It's the first section I go to when I go into a bookshop. I will often pick up quite random books, like I might read a history of London, or, I do the housework to the rest is history. It's something I adore, and I'd like to say it's for educational reasons, but I just love entering the imaginative space in history. And I think that's why I've always been drawn to the history of domestic life over big narratives. I love to know what kind of irons did people use in, 1890. I'm the person who is Googling, what would I have eaten for dinner in 1642? That's kind of my point of interest in history, everyday life.
I'm not going to lie, the amount of times I've thought to myself, looking back, I was literally chatting with Emma Pei Ying yesterday, and she's talking about how she's doing some work on her book, and she's like, I did a research on a specific type of merchant ship from 1642, and I'm like, I just want to go back and look at an author's internet history and seeing the random things you've had to research and study. That has to be a question probably for later in the podcast. That's going in at some point. But, the good thing is we're also talking about, with this particular book, before we dive in, we're talking about history that's kind of in the public consciousness a little bit. The First World War, the Second World War, Vietnam War is discussed a lot. There is moments in the book where, like, it actually rung a lot of bells for me in terms of me learning about history, about like how people viewed the First World War, Second World War, Vietnam War. Interpretation of war changes as well. At the risk of too technical a question, what was the assembly like of researching this particular period in time? Because it is such a fascinating period of history, this 60 or 70 years where the world and interpretation of war changed considerably.
Yeah. Look, that's something I felt deeply challenged by, crossing that many periods of time. It was one of those things where in your dark moments, you're like, I can't actually do this. What am I doing here with this much history? I think for World War One, it's something I've always been fascinated by because I have family connection to World War One. So that's an area I'd already done quite a lot of research in. World War Two, I also have a family connection to. Vietnam, again, but I don't know a great deal about the connection that I have with Vietnam, just because people are still alive. It's still a traumatic topic for people to talk about. Look, a lot of the research was secondary resources. There was a lot of primary resources. So I went through the National Archives and looked at the records of my grandfather and my grandmother on the other side, my maternal grandmother. I went through quite a lot of artifacts that my family have that belonged to my grandfather that he brought back from World War One. But one of the glorious things, and Nick, you were saying how much you love history, you would have died for this, was reading letters at the manuscripts collection at the State Library in Victoria. And wow. It was extraordinary. And, you read very few letters from women to their husbands or their partners or whatever, because on a battlefield to preserve a letter is extremely difficult. But I did find one set of letters that did have the letters from the wife to her husband, and one of the most extraordinary things about that was that I'm opening up these letters in their original envelopes. And one of them, I picked it up and a children's picture fell out of it. Like a little child had drawn a picture for their dad. And it was exactly like my children drew their pictures, like the circle with the lines for the arms and the legs and the circles for the eyes. But the most extraordinary thing was, as I went through the letters, he was there, he was away the whole time. The last letter was another picture from a child, and now the child could draw a human form. And I found that so touching to see what that man had missed out on. This whole child, you could see a child grow up through those pictures. It was such an extraordinary thing to see. And I stumbled on that. That's not something you'd expect to find, which fed in, I guess, to my thinking about, especially with Teddy in the story, what would it be like? You never met your father, or you don't know your father.
I feel like we're right on the cusp of talking about like a key plot point in the book off that. That is amazing though. Like thinking about all of those years that you would have missed in the chance to actually watch your child grow up, which would be, it would just throw up so many moral quandaries, which we'll talk about in a second. But before we do, I have one last question about kind of the assembly of this book before we dive into what you've created here. And that is that this manuscript won an award. And that is the 2026 Quentin Bryce Award. Congratulations. And I feel like we have a good opportunity here, obviously, because you put this book together with UQP. And talk to me about the significance of awards like this in Australia's literary landscape, because there are so many awards like this out there. And I think I always love the chance to shout out an award when I have an award winner on the show. Talk to me about winning that award and what it brought you.
Look, I guess one of the most extraordinary things about it is it is for a novel that celebrates the experience of women, and that's really important to me. That is what I want to write about. I as a woman, I find women's stories particularly interesting, particularly the kinds of stories of which there is a lot of silence around. So that was important. But I do think one of the most significant things about awards such as these, it's really hard for a debut novel to push itself forward, I guess, from the crowd of books. And I guess awards kind of do help you do that. They kind of allow you to push forward a little bit and, maybe be seen. And it's a shame that it has to work like that. It would be really lovely if every debut novel actually got the attention that the work deserves. So I think that, that's why awards are really important. I think, I guess all art forms, no art form provides, unless you're extremely lucky, provides you with a means of living. And so every little bit of money that an award brings in is, to be totally practical about it, that can help you buy some time. So I think awards are really important for that. We need to have a lot more opportunities to allow works to get written, and they only get written with time, which is always very difficult.
Ad break time. Stop the podcast. Hey everyone, just thought I'd stop to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Podpixels, the Trent Dalton of professional podcast platforms. Question, do you have a desire for a great podcast? How are you going to build it? What about the design work? Won't it cost a fortune? Fear not, for Podpixels is a simple, done-for-you website service built specifically for podcasts. They are here to deliver that professional look to your podcast to make it easier for listeners to find your show, and all for one great monthly price. From hobbyists to pros, Podpixels has you covered. Their team provides domains, website hosting, backup, security, and support, handling the full setup and making sure that your show is up to date and allowing you to focus on what you do best, podcast. With Podpixels, you can achieve your full podcasting vision. They are the ultimate one-stop solution for anyone looking to build an online home for their podcast. Check them out below in the show notes and tell them that Nick from Date with a Debut sent you. Thank you, Podpixels, for sponsoring the show. It's great that you highlight that, and I'm glad that we had the chance to kind of recognise that that good that something like an award like that brings, because it enables you to create a book like this, which is And in the Morning, which, of course, now we will dive into fully. And, of course, we'll talk mild spoilers, but not enough to discourage any listener from checking it out yourself, because there are some juicy things in here. We've now arrived at the part of the show where I love the authors to give a 1-minute pitch. I've hopped into a lift. I'm going up. Lenny, what is And in the Morning about?
Oh, my goodness. This is the most terrifying thing. And in the Morning follows the stories of 3 women in 3 different time periods. So we have Lil in 1919, whose husband Bert has just returned from World War I. We have Frankie, who is on a night of leave in Melbourne in 1942. And we have Fran, who is a mother whose son's body has just been returned from Vietnam. So each of these women explore an experience of having a loved one at war. And I guess the real question of the book is how does one go on in light of these experiences? And that's really what each of those narratives explores.
She's nailed it. Now, stuck the dismount perfectly. And it's so funny. Every single author, no matter what episode I do, is always terrified of this question, but you absolutely nail it every single time. This is a magnificent story. It's a nuanced and detailed examination of the impact of war. Of course, the title coming from the Lawrence Binyon poem For the Fallen, very well known. Your choice of timelines is prescient, because all 3 wars, we kind of were talking about it a little bit beforehand, but they're all perceived in a very different way. The First World War and its aftermath, in 1919, when this first timeline takes place, war at that time, I guess, before the First World War, war was almost kind of seen as an honour, as glorious. In Australia's case, it was far away as well. and almost mythical. Yet the First World War was that first real war of first moment of modern warfare, and it showed and exposed how horrific war truly is. It kind of, I think, historically, in my own interpretation, it marked that kind of a line in the sand moment between the supposed glory of the past, like a war like the Boer War was seen as, versus the meat grinder reality of modern warfare. 1942 is the war that was truly global. Australia had that role as the unsinkable aircraft carrier, the nickname that it was given, supporting the effort. American soldiers are on the ground in Melbourne, and everyone is being involved or is touched on it in some way. There's a connection to it. There's a genuine threat of invasion as well. There's lots of talk of the stuff happening in Port Moresby in the background. And then 1969, Vietnam, that's a war that is, still controversial to this day. It was the moment as well where I think, going off the back of, the impact of modern warfare, it's the moment where the horrors of war were beamed into our television screens for the first time. There was no more disconnect. There was no more distance. And a soldier going to Vietnam, some people may forget, but it's very true, was a source of embarrassment and shame. There wasn't an official welcome home ceremony parade for Vietnam veterans until 1987. And what I love is you distinctly separate these different wars, but you bring out the commonalities through these dovetailing stories and themes, especially in family, in grief, in love, and in loss. That is universal, no matter the war and the context. Talk to me about that, because it's one of the joys. It's a pure craft question here as well, but those themes as well are a key part of what connects these timelines together.
Yeah, well, when I, was conceiving the book, it started with the 1919 narrative. That's the one I wanted to write. And then it became clear to me I needed more than that, because one of the things that was really important to me was to bring home the experience of war for women who were, not in the war zone. So not nurses, not those kind of women, kind of the silent sufferers of war, I guess. And that is why I ended up bringing in the other stories, because I wanted to show, that the wounds of war are intergenerational. Men, as he said, the First World War, it wasn't I think it would be a flaw to say it was conceptualized by everybody as a great adventure, because there was a strong anti-war movement in World War I. But for many young men, I imagine men like my grandfather, it was a big adventure. They had never been overseas before. But of course, as the war grinded on, and you can see this with the amount of people who signed up, it drops off, which is why we introduced the conscription debate in 1916. That, these men came home broken. In one book, I remember a quote. It was, "No one came out of a war untouched." The reason of having three narratives as well allows me to think about different ways, the ways in which untouched can be interpreted, right? So, in the First World War, you've got questions, these men come home, women, courtships were not terribly long. People got married really fast before their loved one went to war. So you could be in a situation where a man returns to you, not only is he changed profoundly, but he is a person you never really knew that well before he left, and he's been gone longer than your courtship. And you don't have, divorce wasn't kind of a regular thing. You would have to live with that, and live with it in silence. I think the notion of patriotism was so important after, the great sacrifice that people made of their children or their husbands or whatever. I think, World War II was different in the sense that it came to us. It was on our doorstep, and there was a real threat of invasion. So I think the notion of defending the homeland was stronger. It was probably a war in a sense we were more on board for, but less naive about. But, one of the things that I find really interesting about World War II, when you look at it from women's perspective, and I thought about this with my grandmother. My grandmother was in the WAAF, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, that when war comes, the kind of moral rules that have governed a society go out the window a bit, because you don't know if someone's going to die tomorrow. So, you do have more women, and you've got women in the workforce, which we didn't have in the First World War, but we did in the Second, but also more sexual freedom. You don't know if someone's going to leave. My grandmother told me stories of backyard abortions from women who'd got pregnant during World War II, having your boyfriend. So that idea of death when you're young, of death being around the corner, in a way it's not when you're 20 normally. But as you said, by the time we get to Vietnam, you've got a televised war. You've got, a counterculture that isn't on board with all those patriotic kind of nationalist kind of ideas of the past. They're already pushing against those things. And of course, being televised and being the first televised war, so journalists got everywhere. I think that had a profound impact. And I wanted to explore, I guess, sorry, this is a bit of a mixed up answer, but I really wanted to explore what it means to lose a son. And also having bought into the patriotism, bought into the I'm doing the right thing, how it would feel to lose your boy in that kind of context.
This is actually a good segue. I love that you kind of really have focused on women's war experience here. But before we kind of dive into each respective storyline, I love examining place in a story, and the women's war experiences with war, I think, is very, very tied up with how you present Melbourne, because the city across these three timelines is changed significantly by war. In 1919, I think the key elements that kind of comes through is when soldiers returned, there was this whole resettlement program. Soldiers were given plots of land to move to. I mean, that happened up here in Newcastle as well. In 1942, kind of as you kind of allude to, that the city is mobilised for the war effort. The war is here. There's troops on the ground. And then the 1960s, kind of off the back of it, it's a far different place. There are protests about conscription and the draft. There's all the signs of bring our boys home. It's also the time of the Cold War in the background as well. It is a loaded powder keg. Talk to me. I mean, it's great as well that in that case, that women's experience of being on the ground is actually the perfect lens to examine place in this impact. Talk to me about writing the impact of war on this place, on Melbourne, on a place that, it holds different places across these three different wars.
Yeah, obviously I know Melbourne best. That's why I wanted to concentrate the story in Melbourne as opposed. I mean, we do go to other places. We go to Deniliquin in Lil's past. There's a few other places. But one of the things, and I do know because of Madame Brussels that I'd written quite a long time ago, I had looked a lot into the changing landscape of Melbourne over time. And I think you're right. Like for me, that 1919, because the loss was so great, the loss of life was so great, noticing how the absence of men in a street and the presence of war's damage, men who are crippled, men who, like the terrible injuries facial injuries that people suffered, and they would patch them up. They made a lot of advances in surgery. But I think with World War II, I mean, the place has changed profoundly by the appearance of American soldiers. I think at one point there were I think it was around 1942, 30,000 Americans descended on Melbourne. And culturally, they're bringing something completely different. They had a lot of access to money. There was a lot of tension between the Australians and the Americans because of that money. And, we'd had Hollywood. They were glamorous, these Americans, with their silk stockings and their chocolate and their accents, and they had, were very well presented. But then on the flip side of that, of course, was, the murders, the brownout murders that happened in Melbourne, which kind of darkened, the American reputation, I guess, and made it a bit more of a dangerous city. And, when you read the history books, I guess as a woman, you sort of think about, oh, yeah, all the glamour. But come on, there's 30,000 American men walking around at night, a lot of them drunk. Actually, that's actually really frightening as a woman. And I think with Vietnam, of course, because you have that tension, the ways in which the city is changed by protest, the ongoing protest outside of the American embassy, the protests in the streets, I think Melbourne had the largest moratorium, and it happened after the period in my book, but the largest anti-war moratorium. So I think all those things do impact place, but even the ways in which, the streetscapes change over time with growing population and infrastructural changes, and I'd have to check that all the time. Like, was this particular station actually there at this time? Was it a tram line that ran here or not? What did the trams look like in this period as opposed to this period?
I love that sort of assembly questions that you have to do when you're considering how even a character gets from A to B. What does it actually look like? You go down some rabbit holes whenever you do that with the research. I think the best way to separate this book is in its three storylines. There's a through line, but that I will leave for the reader to discover for themselves. We start, I think the best place to start is in 1919 with Lily, with Teddy, and with Bert. There's that moment of euphoria at the start of this one, with Bert finally returning after being away for 4 years, but it quickly falls apart. As you kind of correctly point out, Teddy, who has grown up without Bert around, he was born in 1915 when Bert was away in Gallipoli in Palestine, is unfamiliar. He doesn't know who this person is. He doesn't know who father is. He doesn't warm to him. There's not a connection. Bert, at the same time, is also dealing with the realities of what we would eventually know as PTSD. There is a significant distance between him and Lil. I love that scene where Lil actually does that letter. There's the kind of talking on letters where she reads that letter that Bert sends her in 1915 about his experiences of climbing the pyramids and everything around that. And the voice that you have there is so different to the voice that you have in front of you, this man who has come back. She talks about his expressions as like it's a landscape. It's sparse. He spends his nights away drinking. There's also this culture of, off the back of kind of Gloria's War, there's this culture of deserters. I think that scene with Alice and, the white feathers and all that is absolutely heartbreaking. But for Lil, she's contending with a different sort of loss, not just the loss of the husband and the man that she kind of thought she knew. Again, they weren't together very long before he left. But also, if she's moving to, if they're going to go and resettle, potentially move to Gippsland, she is contending with the loss of her support network that got her through this period of time in the first place, particularly, her friends, of Alice, everyone. Talk to me about this trio.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that this morning. When I wrote the book, I wrote it in its three parts and then put it together. And it wasn't until I read the slapped up manuscript that had to be rewritten that I realized how important Alice had become in the narrative. And I actually wrote her to be more important as a result of that. I think, she has been reliant. I mean, she's a young woman who lost her mother when she was a child, and Alice has always been there. And Alice has got her through this period of time when I guess women would have to rely on their female networks. And that's not something that we really read much about, is the place of those female supports to one another during the First World War. And I think for Bert, I think the hard thing for Lil is that over time she's had this, Bert is a romantic figure to her. He's such a romantic figure, and because he's been away for so long, it's very easy to build up that romantic story in your mind. And she has to adjust to, when he returns, that perhaps that story is not quite right. When someone's not there, you've got nothing to corrupt your fantasy, I guess. And he comes home, and for me it was really important not to overplay, to make the damage subtle, to make it hard to pick up, hard to name. And so she is aware of something not being quite right, but she can't quite come at exactly what it is. It's a blank space. I think of it like those terrible, maps of colonization, where you look at a continent and it's all black except for tiny little places. And I kind of think of that being what Bert's like for her. He's like a map that is blanked out. She can't quite make sense of it. But they all know, like Alice, one of the first questions she says is, how is he? But really, how is he? Because they all know that none of these men are quite all right. So to lose Alice was, I guess, even a more profound loss in some respects, because she's been there to help her through, to help her survive those 4 years in a very practical sense.
Yeah, I think listening to that whole element, it's you can see that there's a desperate need of reconnection. And I will say it's not one way. I think as well, Bert is trying to connect, but he doesn't know how to deal with this. He doesn't know how to process this. There's moments where he's quite dangerous. And because he has seen things that really have changed him and left a considerable mark. Loss is also a key part of the 1969 story, where we follow Fran and Robbie. We never meet Robbie, really, because he is killed in Vietnam. And Fran's story is just grief incarnate. The story starts, she is being asked, what do you want to do with his body? She finds herself often daydreaming about Robbie. Moments in the house. She slips into moments. Her friends come and check on her, kind of off the back of that support network. But the thing that really interests me is that she's filled with shame. And there are moments where she kind of grapples with this particular moment, or a few moments, in fact, where he's drafted. And she keeps saying to herself, I should have stopped him. That's the feeling she has. I could have stopped him from going. I could have stopped him from doing this. And throw that mindset into the time where people are seeing Vietnam very differently to previous wars. There's that stuff in the background. I love that you describing her as grief just drags at her body. It pulls her down. It's filled with weight. Fran goes through a lot in this story. Talk to me about Fran.
Yeah, look, Fran was one of the reasons that I brought the 1942 narrative in, because, I'm a mother. I have a son. I was writing it against the backdrop of my own boy. He's now 12, but he was quite small when, I started this. I think Fran shows that behind all these heroic narratives we have of these great achievements, which I'm not downplaying the achievements of men in war. I think, what they suffered was extraordinary. But the ongoing, unrelenting suffering of losing a child, a suffering of which there is no light for Fran. There is no light. You don't get over something like that. I think for Fran, she grew up in a generation of which, war was still a noble enterprise. In World War II, we were fighting for this country, right? I think we often do this with our children, where you let something happen, you don't really think it through as much as you should have. And then the guilt that you would suffer, just thinking, but I saw other women protested the war. Why didn't I think to do that? Why didn't I stand up? There were conscientious objectors. There were groups like Save Our Sons, hiding young men in networks of houses. And she, it's a mistake that can never be undone. There's very few mistakes we make in our lives that can never be undone, that have extraordinary gravity. But a mistake like that can never be undone, combined with the extraordinary gravity. Now, obviously, it wasn't Fran's fault, but there are some things we just could never get over. And I think we don't always acknowledge that, do we? That these women suffer. We talk about the PTSD and we talk about what these women would suffer ongoing. And I don't think we really have thought a great deal about that in our thinking about histories of wars.
There's a great question I want to come back to you about that. But before I do, it's important to also intercut with 1942. because we have two very, very, I don't want to say the word bleak, but they're stories where the grief and examination of grief and loss is far more front and center, which is why 1942 plot is so important, because it's a developing love story between Frankie and Ed. And again, this is a time when the war is omnipresent. There's stories coming out of Port Moresby, risk of invasion. Americans are around, as you kind of say, causing ruckus. But this is also people who are young and having fun. And as you say, inhibitions are kind of going out the window a little bit. It's a different time. When we meet Ed, he's an air gunner. And that is seen as a source of embarrassment, which I think is kind of hilarious. That here he is, because he's not seen as a pilot. He's seen as an air gunner. I'm like, which just kind of made me go, dude, you're fighting in the war, man. What is wrong with you? And then I love the little through line of Ed wanting to take Frankie dancing. And there's a great line. It's one of my favorite lines in the book, right near the end of the story, where Frankie is clearly, she's very into this guy. He's wonderful. And then she just has this line that says, in him yet there is no war that waits on the horizon. I don't even have a question here. I just love this part of the story.
It's nice, yeah. Yeah. Look, I enjoyed writing World War II. As you said, it's such a change, and what a time to be alive. Frankie is young. She's quite young. She's only, just 18. She signed up young. For many of these young women, I imagine this would be a time of excitement. You're on your own. You're going out. You're meeting lots of other young people. And I wanted to capture that, that glorious thing when you're young, but you're sort of uncertain. Like, she's grown up in unusual circumstances. She looks at someone like Bobby, who's quite sophisticated and glamorous, and she's like, how do you do it? How do you do this thing? How do you be alluring? I don't understand, So yeah, to try to capture that and to capture the thrill of what it would be like to meet someone in a context of where life is so fragile. Things can change in an instant. People can go away. What does it feel to be at that moment? The kind of joy and the of standing on a precipice, but in a different way.
Yeah, there's so much. I loved that entire segment. All the people in it. It was just it was really welcome in this story, and it gives another lens to the complexity of war as it is, because it's not just guns and fighting. There's just so much more going on, and that again is a part of this story. We're talking about an element and an experience of war that is outside what just the men dealt with, which is what's critical. There are so many, and this brings it back to that point that you kind of very nicely raised when we were talking about Fran. Like, there are wonderful lines in this book, wonderful examinations of PTSD. We are seeing generations over this period of 50 or 60 years, and you're seeing them warts and all, but we also see that it was an exceptional period of generations that endured tremendous adversity. There is a scene, I will not spoil it, I'll just give the context, but not involving who, in 1942, where one character talks about the diggers of the past and how they were all miserable bastards. But then he's asked, well, why do you want to go then to war? And they go, well, we all got to do our bit. And then there's a contrast with a letter at the end between two women as well, where there's a line which was, we were told that it was an honor for our men to go to war, but I wish they thought of what we would have to bear. Which in my head, there it is. There's the button. There is what this book is about. So, as a final question before we say goodbye to this wonderful book that you've created, what did writing and In the Morning teach you? Be it about war, be it about yourself. What did this exercise teach you?
Oh my goodness, that's such an enormous question.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I think for any writer, the experience of writing a book is so profound. the things you discover about yourself, the things you learn about craft. I mean, I learned so much about craft in writing this book. You also learn a great deal about yourself. I mean, I don't know if this is true. Maybe I'm just a particularly narcissistic writer. I don't know. But I feel like everything is you in a book and everything is not you. Do you know what I mean? And
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And I feel like my love for my children are everywhere in this book. My pain over loss is everywhere in this book. What it means to be a mother, what it means to love is, and love under pressure, the complexities of love, that love never is straightforward. It is difficult. I think all of those things are there. I learned so much about craft. I learned to trust myself. I think I write extremely slowly. My publisher will totally agree. I'm the slowest writer in the world. I learned to be more certain of my voice and I guess to embrace the things that are my eccentricities as a writer, to lean into them, actually, that they weren't as bad as they weren't as problematic as I considered, and that some things that were my deficiencies could actually be viewed as my talents as a writer. I don't know. I mean, it's such a massive experience, isn't it? It's profound.
It is profound. And I just want to say it, you should be really proud of it. It's a damn good book. It's a damn good book. It's filled with intricacies and subtleties that I want to go back and read it again, which is the best thing that you can ask for with a book. Will you write again? Will there be another one?
Yes. Look, I've wanted to write for as long as I can remember, and I'm already writing again. It's what I'm working on at the moment is historical, although it's not very long ago. It's the 70s, and again, it has to do with women. I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've kind of got a list of books that I'm just got to work through. That kind of change. But yeah, look, for me, writing is something that I feel that I'm supposed to do. In the long periods I have where I haven't been able to, I've always felt a kind of background grief, not this big profound grief, but like a niggle at the background of grief that of being away from this thing that is so important to me. So yes, definitely.
I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, guilty as charged when it comes to having a massive pile of stories you need to read. Absolutely guilty as charged. Hey everyone, Nick here. I'm excited to announce that I've launched a brand new book newsletter featuring book reviews, recommendations, latest news from the publishing world, opinion pieces, short stories, and more. One monthly newsletter, no spam, just the good book stuff. The sort of email you're glad shows up in your inbox. Sign up now for free, and for a small additional monthly fee, get early access to Date with a Debut episodes and exclusive content, including special extra episodes with our guests, Second Date, where they run another gauntlet of rapid-fire questions. Subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes below. We're now at the part of the podcast. We're now at the part of the podcast where we will do a rapid-fire question part of the date, where I basically fling a bunch of questions at you and you give me the first answer that comes to your head. Lenny, are you ready?
Yes.
It's not so bad. First and foremost, of course, being I can imagine you are someone who reads a lot. You love reading. So tell me, what is your favorite book that you've read in the last 12 months?
I think I really loved The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I thought it was, she's a beautiful writer. Her portrayal of love, her characterization of Achilles and Patroclus. I love that. I also love Silence of the Girls. I think I was going Pat Barker's one. I think it's Briseis. Went on a bit of a classical Greek kind of tour, but I loved those couple of books.
It's a great book, actually, The Song of Achilles. To be honest, I'm now tempted to go on a bit of a Greek tangent myself because the Odyssey is about to come out.
Yes.
And I have seen all the reviews, and the reviews look insanely good.
Yeah,
and
they've
I'm
been
like,
really
oh my,
good.
yeah, and I'm like, oh my god, he's actually done it. Like, he's actually turned this massive, enormous 3,000-year-old story that seems bigger than anything to tell, and he's actually done it. Damn it, Christopher Nolan! Like, so I'm very keen to see that. So maybe I'll have to like do a rabbit hole back into Homer's poems as well as other literature around it. Off the back of that, what is your favorite debut novel that you've ever read?
Look, this is a tough one. I don't know about ever read, but I was looking at my bookcase beforehand, and The Animals in That Country by Laura Jean McKay had a huge, I thought that was an amazing book. Such a strange, clever book. I really loved that.
I have been waiting for so long for someone to mention that damn book. It is so good. I was literally chatting with Claudine Tinellis a few weeks ago, and I have been saying, I am desperate for someone to talk about this book to. It's like it's my natural, it's basically, for me, whenever I get this question pitched to me, it's either To Kill a Mockingbird or Animals in That Country. Those are my default answers to that question. I loved this book when it came out. It is an absolute favorite of mine. And anyone, like, I will go, like, it was one of those books I could not put it down. It was right in the middle of the pandemic, and
what a time to read it.
Yes, considering the subject matter, considering the topics. Met her several times. Cannot sing enough praises about this book. Anyone who is listening, go and read The Animals in That Country. Go and read it. Just do it now. Like, stop the podcast and go and do it now, and then come back. Anyway, so, speaking of great books, I would be remiss not to mention the non-fiction piece that you've put together, This Moral Pandemonium, which is a short biography about Madame Brussels.
Yeah,
I've had Madeline Cleary on the show. And her book, The Butterfly Women, talks about Little Lon and Madame Brussels. Please tell me you two have corresponded in some way, shape, or form.
I haven't. I've corresponded with Barbara Mitchington, who's written a big, fairly recent biography of Madame Brussels. My little book was quite a long time ago, and at the time I wrote that, it was very primary source driven. And since, there's been, like, as I said, Barbara's book, but no, I haven't. Go talk to Madeline Cleary, and go read The Butterfly Women, off the back of books that are heavily recommended. The Butterfly Women has been the book that has come back to me more than any other book this year. So I had her on the show last year. It's a great book. You can actually do a walking tour in Melbourne now based on the book, because she does a fantastic examination of the lives of women in colonial Melbourne, and particularly along Little Lon, which was kind of seen as the red light district of the time. But it's a fantastic story, and Madame Brussels plays a very major part of that story. So gotta read, there's a connection point there. You gotta reach out. Because I actually thought, before I started this book, and I was thinking about, I actually thought of fictionalizing Madame Brussels. I actually thought of writing that as a fiction. It'd be great to see how someone else did it.
Matt, all right, we're making that happen. I'm putting it out into the ether officially now. What's off the back of kind of a topic we've talked about, I've decided, let's throw this question in here. What is the funniest specific piece of research you dove into in your internet history when preparing for this book?
You wouldn't believe the levels of my insanity.
Yes, I would.
Like tea bags. When was the tea bag invented? Is it okay to have used tea bags? I did a lot of Googling around milk deliveries around Melbourne and at what times they stopped, like how long was milk being delivered in bottles for. I spent a lot of time doing that. Things like, actually the clothing one. I love looking at historical clothing. I spent a lot of time Googling outfits, just constantly looking at clothes. You do random things like, Mortine. I don't know if you remember, like I mentioned, Carol bringing over the Mortine, and I remember Mortine from my childhood. And, I spent a good 30 minutes Googling Mortine containers from 1969. What did they look like? Was Mortine the brand? What soap products did people use? Was it Velvet? Was it Sunshine? I learned a lot about things like that in the process of this book.
I feel like I should do like a whole separate episode. Like sit down with a bunch of historical authors and do like, what's the randomest piece of research that you dug into, talking with your book? Do you have a favorite word?
Well, if you asked my publisher, she'd probably say it's the word turn. Too many turns. You need to get rid of all these turns. So that's what her favorite word would be. I don't know. One of the things, I really love about writing is rhythm is really important to me and sound is really important to me. So words I love the word hubris. It's such I didn't use it in the book, but it's such I think I might have actually, but it's such a beautiful shaped word, I love the names of flowers, and I love words to do with nature. So no favorite, but I do love the rhythms and sounds of language. I should have been a poet, probably. I probably would have been happy, but I don't have the skill level for that.
Hey, yeah, you're now officially a published author. It'll be just a short jump over. Just be learning the craft. I like onomatopoeic words, or like alliterative words, stuff that flows off the tongue. I like it. Who was Gordon Robertson and Mary O'Brien?
Oh, yeah. So Gordon Robinson is my paternal grandfather. He died the year before I was born. He fought with the Australian Light Horse. He was in 1915. He got back in July of 1919, my grandfather. And Mary O'Brien, who was Mary Turan originally, she's my grandma. She died about 10 years ago. I was extremely close with her. And she was in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force when she was a very young woman. And so they're related to me. I talk about Alice's husband, who is Irish. My O'Brien side are all Richmond Irish background. So there's a lot of family, and also, I've got here, like a self-published from a relative of a family tree, and whenever I needed a last name, I just pull it over, and so there's names all over the place of relatives in the manuscript. Yeah,
that's so nice, and I appreciated you shouting them out in your acknowledgements, especially. You and I absolutely love history, love diving into history, could spend all my days doing it. For someone who, if there's someone listening to this going like, God, I need to do a deep dive into history, what's one piece of writing advice you would give to them to show that getting into history is actually pretty rad?
Look, I think reading about daily life is a really good place to go. I think grand narratives, I also like the grand narratives as well, but I think they can get boring. Even when you're researching, like when you're looking at something like World War I, and you can look at the names of the battles and what regiments were moving where or whatever. But what I've always been intrigued by is, soldiers' letters. Like, what did it feel like to be there? What did you miss? What was your exact experience? I think when we enter the lives of people and their reflections, it becomes the most interesting, because we can find things that we can identify with. And I think, that's a really great way into history. History's amazing. Like, it's sad to see its decline in schools and things, because I think we can learn so much from history. But it's just, learning about other people's lives and how they dealt with things and what they faced, and I guess that common everyday bravery and courage that is life. Yeah,
it makes me look at the world that I live in around me so differently, in a good way. It makes you realize that, the streets that I'm walking on or the places I live in there's been many, many people who have lived before me in the past. And there'll be many, and it also makes you realize there'll be many people who will live after you're gone in the future. Which makes it far more interesting. And one day you'll be history too. So I think it's kind of cool that you should examine that as well.
I just went and saw Rome, the exhibition at the museum, and there's a tile with a footprint. A child had obviously ran through the wherever they were producing the tiles and stood on it 2,500 years ago. And I just, it's an amazing thing, isn't it? We're looking at this. What will be left of us one day? Maybe someone will find some really random thing of ours. It's incredible.
My final question. Are you happy?
Am I happy? Why do you ask that? Am I happy with the book? Is that just general in life?
It can be whatever you want. Like, I always like to ask this question at the end. I feel like we don't ask enough questions like that, just in general.
Look, I'm really happy. I'm too scared to open it, I have to say, because as long as I don't open it, I can't find anything that I'll be like, oh, why didn't I fix that before it went through? But yeah, look, I feel a great sense of completion, this thing that I've wanted to do for so long, and to now be able to say, well, I did do it. I did it in the end. And I think that's an incredible feeling.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm so glad that I've had the chance to chat to you about this wonderful book, this wonderful historical novel, And in the Morning. For everyone listening, you can check it out down in the description. It's published by University of Queensland Press. If you enjoyed our discussion, we're literally about to go and do another one. We have a second exclusive show called Second Date, where I chat with Lenny more about her reading habits. You can check that out by signing up to my newsletter. Link is in the description. Lenny, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy chatting with you about this book, and thank you so much for putting it into my hands. I loved reading it.
It's been a pleasure, Nick. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Date with a Debut, and for listening to the Words and Nerds channel. You can buy all books mentioned in today's episode down in the description box, and if you enjoyed the show, drop us a review, leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to hear episodes when they drop, be sure to subscribe to Words and Nerds, or you can subscribe to Date with a Debut on Podbean to hear the latest episodes as they drop. This episode was edited and produced by myself, Nick Wasiliev. Additional production credits to Dani V from Words and Nerds, music by Sakura HZ, and thanks to the publishers and authors who make this show possible. This show is sponsored by Podpixels. Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art podcast co-production, recorded and edited on the lands of the Awabakal